We have Wanja Michuki. Wanja is a family enterprise coach, consultant, advisor, and she's also an intuitive energy healer. But for tonight, Wanja is a writer. She's a writer and a storyteller who will present to us her first ever published piece. Wanja, could you take us through your story?
Yes, sure. Thank you. So my story is titled Going Back into the Pool, and it's a story about my relationship with water, and in particular, my relationship with water in pools, in water bodies, because water to me is it's almost holy. And this started from my experience as a kid, starting swimming at Musangari in the baby pool, which was my most joyous place. So this is something I never forgot. I never forgot the experience of that, and then evolving as a swimmer. But in the backdrop of this was also my life happening. And the pool was sort of my calming, cleansing ground. It was a place where I experienced connection with the divine. So going back into the pool begins in the baby pool, and then it comes full circle to my life as an adult, and going back to the pool that my father built after falling out with my siblings when my dad died, when my parents died. And it was, going back to the pool was like a process of healing. And I didn't know that at that point. I had sort of, there was some intervening years where I hadn't kept up my relationship with the pool. But when I went back, it was like a crescendo of dealing with what had been going on throughout that time. So it's a story about water. It's also a story about my relationship with my father. It's a story about my own internal world, like just knowing myself. It's a story about my relationship with the Creator, with the divine, with God. One day, my mother pulled me out of training unexpectedly, saying it was too much of a bother and that I wouldn't swim with the team anymore. My swim teacher had a word with her, but my mother was adamant. At this point, I had only butterfly left to qualify for the amateur championships. I was top of my class in academics, and I couldn't make out what the issue was. Previously, my mother had gotten my hair cut because she said it was too much to take care of with swimming. I didn't resist then or now. My opinions about my hair or swimming were not solicited, and I didn't have the language or agency to refuse. I also didn't allow myself to feel the disappointment of this. What would I do with it if I did? 2 school terms went by without me training, and then out of the blue, after a regular swimming lesson, my teacher approached me saying the championships were coming and the team needed a swimmer for the relay, and I was the only one he could think of to join the existing team. My mother had been clear about me not swimming, her word final, and so I asked him to speak to her. Whatever he said, my teacher's intervention worked because my mother allowed me to swim in this particular championship. It was important because aside from the relay, I was also registered for the 25 meters butterfly. Unknowns to me, the 4th All Africa Games were scheduled to be held in Nairobi the following year, and to participate, I needed to qualify for the amateur championships. The day came, and it was a huge meet at Aga Khan High School. The older boys and girls were competing, and whenever they were there, it was the big leagues. There were swimmers from the likes of Aga Khan Mombasa, Rift Valley Academy, Hospital Hill, and St. Mary's School. I arrived at the venue at lunch break because I had to get my photo taken for a passport that morning. It was 1985, and I was about to go on my first cross-border trip to Zambia using my own passport. I wore my swimsuit underneath my clothes because I sensed I would have to rush for my race once I got to Aga Khan. I was not happy with this photo-taking arrangement, as there was a real risk of me missing my races. It made no sense to me why it couldn't have been planned for another day. My displeasure was captured in the photo. I was just in time for my heats, which were organized by age. The Musangari team was on the benches to the left of the pool, closer to the deep end. My teacher was pacing up and down, holding the schedule in his clipboard, whistle hanging from his neck or in his mouth, calling out our names, psyching us up. I was worried because I hadn't trained, but he encouraged me, telling me I would be fine. The loudspeaker was on. 25 meters butterfly, blah, 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 Michuki. My race was called. I needed to pee and I was up for a swim. I remember at some point before the word go, I stopped hearing the cheering crowd. Inside, a clear, whispering voice that sounded like mine, only bigger, came up and said, "Use breaststroke legs." In those days, you could use breaststroke legs for butterfly, but I had never done this before and had only witnessed it once and didn't recall that person winning their race. Use breaststroke legs. It was louder. On your marks, get set, go! I dived in, gliding my body in a wave, gaining momentum, head out the water, breaststroke legs. I didn't stop to look at anyone else and couldn't hear anything other than the rhythm of my breathing. My arms were like paddles, up over my head to the front, down, pull, breaststroke legs, head up, inhale, repeat. It was perfect synchrony. I was cruising. And when I got to the end and tapped the wall and looked up and around me, first to the right and then to the left, I saw I had won the race. I couldn't believe it. I'd followed my instincts and won big. My victory was my own. And in that moment, I learned I could pull myself to a level I had not experienced before by listening to and trusting the voice inside that got louder when I shut out the noise of the world around me.
Beautiful. Wanja, a big part of your piece, of course, aside from the main part, which is the swimming, is your attitude towards spirituality. And as young as you are, when you won this race, you could see that. And you could see how this has been grounding in your life. You also discuss, I think we had this conversation earlier, you discuss engaging with your shadow self through emotions and grief. So how has acknowledging and integrating these shadow aspects changed your approach to personal challenges and your relationships with people?
So it's a work in progress and will be for the rest of my life is how I see it. You know, it's primary school. Musangari for me was really instrumental in developing my relationship with the divine, because there was something that would happen not only in the pool, but even in the chapel. When we'd go to chapel, I'd feel it. I'd walk into chapel and just feel a holiness about the place. And same thing with church, when we'd go to church on Sundays as a family. But I think the divine was a refuge for me because, you know, one misconception I think that people have is that, oh, you know, you must have lived this super privileged life, which I did. But I also experienced a lot of chaos inside of it. And so I would retreat into just communicating with God, which I viscerally felt, and I still do. And I've had that all through my life. So I can handle the wildest of challenges, and I have, because I've never let that go. Like I've never let that go. Nobody can take that away from me, basically. You know, people can take away other things, but not my relationship with God, with the divine. And I allowed myself to define that, to explore it. So, you know, I used to go to church. I don't go to church anymore.
Why?
Because I would sort of find myself in church and be like, what are these guys talking about? You know, what are they talking about? How are they interpreting the gospel in this way? Or also just being put off from, you know, like Kenya is such a holy Joe place. People are so, you know, religious, but crooked. You know, people are really cruel.
Be God.
yeah, in Jesus' name, they'll say. But so for me, I was like, this just doesn't resonate with me, and I have a direct relationship to God, which the elements, I really experienced that in the elements, water being one, but in forests, walking, like just being in nature. In terms of my relationships with people and the shadow, it's a work in progress because of my experience. For instance, mistrust is something that I really have to keep working on. Trust, I can kind of be like, what is your actual agenda here? And but I'm aware of it. So as soon as I have an experience, I journal. For me, it's journaling, it's meditation. I'll unpack what was happening there, what was I feeling, where do I feel it in my body, what do I have to release, what do I have to process. And actually, I also find that it's a wholesome way to live. I like it, yeah.
Your story comes full circle in part 3. And I mean, you've touched on this when you're giving the synopsis. So in part 3, what happens is that you describe your deliberate decision to reconnect with swimming as a means of self-disruption, self-discovery, and healing. Now, could you just expand more on how swimming continues to influence your outlook on life?
So going back to the pool was after my parents died. And because this is sub judice, got an ongoing court case, I can't get into that too much. But, well, let's just say that 12 years later today, I've never received a share of my parents' estates. And so I cut off, when I kind of realized what was going on, I cut off from my 5 siblings, all of them. So it was a very isolating experience and a very isolating time, but the betrayal that I felt and the injustice that I felt just had me sort of decide, okay, I've got to now create a life. I mean, so drastic, this is my family, it's a well-known family, so a lot of social relationships gone. I found myself in a very inward place, But again, as I said, I've never quite been alone because God has always been with me. So my decision to go back to the pool was because inside of this cutoff, it was almost as if my father built a hotel, Windsor Golf Hotel and Country Club, and Windsor was like a second home. So with this cutoff, now I wasn't going to Windsor, and it had been years, like a very abrupt end. When I decided to disrupt myself, I was like, I need to disrupt myself to be my dad's daughter, because in a way, with this cutoff, not going to Windsor, not participating in anything family, it was almost as if, I might as well be from another family. But my relationship with my dad and I were really, really close. And I was like, I'm going back to be his daughter. That is justification enough for me to go back. So the return was to the pool, because the pool was the place that I always hung out. That's where we'd sit and have lunch. But again, I was going back to swim. I was going back to the pool. And in that process, I talk about the breathing, and how breath work brings up emotion. Swimming laps in that pool just brought up what I was actually feeling around not just my siblings, my father dying, my mother dying, like loss, isolation, all of it, very clearly, so I could write about it. Yeah.
Beautiful. Um, I'm, I'm glad you brought out the estrangement bit because it happens to be a big, theme in your piece with siblings, with family, with people generally, especially after the loss of your parents. So my question is, how has writing about these experiences influenced your perspective on family, forgiveness, and reconciliation?
So, first of all, this piece is so important to me because coming from a family like mine, it's almost like you're not allowed. You're not allowed to reveal. You're not allowed to talk about what goes on. And it gave me that opportunity to. I've been writing about this, journaling. I mean, I've got stacks of journals. But I couldn't write about it, even really talk about it, As I said, there's a court case, sub judice, you cannot talk about it. So my thing was, how can I be living life and my experience be an unknown? I mean, it's like a double injustice. I'm like, if I died today, then nobody would ever know. And so writing, was sort of like the solution to that. I'm a family business coach, consultant, and advisor. This whole experience basically created a career for me because, I mean, you can tell me the most horrific story of family dynamics and I'll believe you, And a lot of advisors don't, You might be sitting there and they're sort of looking at you like, you brat, how dare you come here and claim, that you've been suffering. But it happens, it's true, it's real. So I studied family dynamics. I really got into it. And forgiveness inside of family dynamics is sort of like a thing that I've done from a distance up to now. I've kind of been like, I forgive you. And I've had this conversation actually with my siblings, but a very strange, the other side has to be ready to hear what you have to say. But to forgive is kind of like, yeah, this is not, I'm not going to hold this against you. We need to work something out here. But you may not have that opportunity. It's just the way life goes. You might not. So I treat forgiveness as something that you literally really do it for yourself. It's like I'm not going to hold this against you. I'm not going to keep bitterness in my heart for you. But it also doesn't mean that you say, so you can do whatever you want. It's made me stronger, actually. I think it's made me understand life better. I had a very naive view of life. Even just the whole, it's either good or bad. No, it's beyond duality. Life is just a mystery. It's mysterious. And I think what I've learned from this process was you just flow. You just flow with life as best as you can. I'm working on it. I'm a work in progress, I can be jarred by things, but then I'll come back to, I can also just let this slide. And it's just a path. It's a way that I've chosen to live life. I sort of think about life in terms of energy, and in an environment like Kenya, which is super transactional, super, care, concern, like people, it's like those things have just been taken over by how much, what is the value, what can I get out of something? So this approach helps me navigate life, and yeah, I'm still learning. I'm still learning.
Beautiful. Thank you, Wanja.